LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 10th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 11 best, most newsworthy clips of what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. I have both Saturday Night Live and HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher as my quick political comedy sources at the beginning. My main topics are Democrats divided, ? And then there'll also be a clip at the end, the Schiff Trump collusion update that seems to be a recurring theme on the show as we wait for the Mueller report that supposedly was supposed to come in February or March. I also have put a link down in the video description to my list of 11 clips from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. So if you want to follow along on my clip list, I have kind of cryptic notes, but you can kind of tell what the topics are and who's speaking in the clips mostly. The Democrats divided theme was really that was a theme covered by all of the news summaries, and I'm going to compare news summaries from all five of the corporate news outlets, although I guess CBS had it more Democrats preparing for 2020 more than Democrats divided, and it's pretty brief. I'll show you. CBS also had an interview with Elizabeth Warren. I'll have a Liz Cheney clip about the anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. I'll have a Julián Castro clip talking about reparations, and as I said, the Schiff clip at the end. But as I promised, and I'm also going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Sacramento, and it has a couple, when we get to the anti-Semitism part, when Chuck Todd talks about George Soros, that would bring up something that happened here in Sacramento. And also I just want to talk about some of the things the ACLU has been doing. I saw 60 Minutes was running an ACLU story that was kind of interesting. I didn't get to watch the whole thing. But anyway, I promised that I would start off with this Saturday Night Live clip. This is actually, that was briefly touched on in all the news summaries, except, of course, Fox News. I don't think the words Paul Manafort ever came up in the Fox News news summary, or even on Fox News Sunday anywhere. I know it didn't come up in the news summary that I'll show you in a little bit, but it got covered extensively both by Saturday Night Live and by HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. I'll show you the Saturday Night Live coverage. There's some good jokes in here, which I'll talk about with you after we watch them together over here.
Okay, here's how bad Trump's presidency is going. His campaign manager this week was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and for Trump, that's good news. Paul Manafort, who looks like he was born divorced, faced up to 24 years in prison, but only got 4 years, probably in a minimum security white-collar facility with a bunch of his friends. The guy stole over $50 million, and he basically got sentenced to college. The judge who sentenced Manafort said he gave him a lenient sentence because Manafort had lived, quote, an otherwise blameless life, which is also the name of my favorite Third Eye Blind album. Also, how can you possibly claim Manafort lived a blameless life? He's being sentenced for another crime next week, and it's a crime he committed while on house arrest for a third crime.
Paul Manafort got 47 months for tax evasion and bank fraud, which, as a black guy, feels very unfair, but as a rich black guy, it's a little encouraging. If I could steal millions of dollars and the United States presidency in exchange for like 3 years of prison in my 70s, I can't promise I won't try. Chances are I'm going to end up in jail in my 70s anyway for saying something that's fine now but will be punishable by death in 40 years, like calling my kids the N-word or calling my wife the N-word or calling some white lady the N-word.
Your kids?
And you saw that Colin Jost there was about to cover the day spa scandal with the all these Republicans, including Donald Trump, being photographed with this woman who apparently was selling access to Chinese executives to Mar-a-Lago and the Trump family and Trump, and she was the founder of that day spa where Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, was accused of soliciting prostitution, although she doesn't own it anymore, and she's not charged with anything. But that was a big story, but didn't make it into the Big Five corporate outlet news analysis shows. But it did make it on Saturday Night Live, just like the Paul Manafort thing, which was covered briefly on most of the shows. ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talked a little bit about the injustice of Paul Manafort's sentence, which I saw got some fairly decent coverage about. I'm one of those people, I was a law clerk in a federal public defender's office back when the sentencing guidelines were mandatory. And for those who don't know, Paul Manafort was supposed to get like 18 to 24 years under the sentencing guidelines, which are supposed to like take the unfairness out of the system, although I think the sentencing guidelines are overly harsh in a lot of ways. But then in like 2005 or 2006, there was this Supreme Court case, I think it's U.S. versus Booker, where the U.S. Supreme Court said judges have the right to have discretion and the sentencing guidelines can't be mandatory. And it's cases like this Paul Manafort sentencing where he got basically less than 4 years when he was supposed to get 18 to 24 under the federal sentencing guidelines, that show exactly why, rich people with high-priced lawyers, white people, people who the judge can relate to, in this case, like old white Republican judge, old white Republican defendant. It's, the textbook case for why you need sentencing guidelines to avoid this kind of bias in sentencing. But I'm one of those people who thinks not that Paul Manafort's sentence should be longer, but that there are a lot of people out there whose sentences should be shorter. I don't think incarceration does a lot of good for a lot of people, and maybe not even for Paul Manafort. I'm not sure what would do good for Paul Manafort, but I just want to make clear, it's not so much that I wish he got the longer sentence. I just wish there were so many other people who got shorter sentence. Over here I have my new Jim Crow mass incarceration book that's always been up there. There used to be another book next to it, The Divide. Matt Taibbi, the Rolling Stone reporter, wrote basically about how like white collar criminals are skating all over the country while poor people are being totally overwhelmed for doing really petty crimes. And anyway, I just wanted to point that out, talking about Paul Manafort. And Bill Maher did some Paul Manafort jokes, but then he transitioned into, all the scandals going on from the Trump administration. The Democrats should be able to get some traction, but unfortunately, Democrats seem to always be attacking themselves, and that's the main theme, Democrats divided. And that's why I want to show this HBO Real Time with Bill Maher clip. That's a bunch of jokes about that. And then it talks a little more about the scandals and sort of brings it all back around with a callback that I kind of like, the callback at the end that I'll talk about with you after we watch that minute 43-second clip together over here.
So this seems like it would have been a great week, right, for the Democrats to make some political hay? But no, of course, they're Democrats. They spent the week arguing with each other about whether one of their own, Representative Ilhan Omar, who has one fan, was anti-Semitic. Only Democrats could snatch the issue of anti-Semitism away from Republicans. In fact, Congressman Steve King, you know him of Iowa, he said today, wait, I thought we were the Jew haters. But this went on all week. They were arguing about this. It got so petty. Some people were calling for censure, which is more drastic than a resolution, but not as severe as expulsion, but harsher than a reprimand, but worse than the silent treatment, but less degrading than finger wagging. I mean, it was just so petty. Meanwhile, Trump did at least 3 things that would get anybody else impeached this week, among them insisting that his kids have security clearance over the objections of the CIA and the FBI. Why do Trump's kids, by the way, get to play a bigger role in our government than the Queen of England's kids? Her kids just walk around holding hands and wearing different hats. They're not in charge of the Middle East, for Christ's sakes. Jared Kushner is called a security threat by our own intelligence agencies. It's okay to hate him without being anti-Semitic, right?
And I like that Jared Kushner joke. You know, it is not anti-Semitic to dislike Jared Kushner. I believe that's something we can all agree on. And I will talk a little bit more about what I think is anti-Semitic and anti-Semitic tropes when we get more into the Ilhan Omar controversy, which I will be talking about as someone who was raised as a Jew, although I'm agnostic. And I was even like in a Zionist youth group when I was in high school, but I tend to be much more... if anything, more pro-Palestinian than Zionist at this point in my life and for many years. And I think, especially in the days of the Bibi Netanyahu as the Prime Minister of Israel, well, anyway, I'll get into all of that in a little bit, but I want to show some of the news summaries in addition. Well, I'm going to show you 5 news summaries from all of the big 5 corporate outlets, starting with the longest, best one from NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Although, I don't know, on the whole anti-Semitism thing, I think he may go a little bit overboard, as I'll show when I show an extended clip of him questioning Liz Cheney. That's clip number 8 coming up. Wait, no, yeah, clip number 8. That I think is almost a softball question where Chuck Todd, who is also Jewish, and then Jake Tapper, you'll see, is also Jewish later, although I'm not showing a clip of him talking about this. But Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper did both sort of agree on something here, that they both had the Democrats divided theme to start off their shows. I'm going to put those back to back. And I don't know, am I saying that there's a Jewish media conspiracy, that there's some sort of conspiracy between Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper? That would be an anti-Semitic trope, and no, I'm not saying that. I just wanted to make that clear. I'm just saying that Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper both happen to have chosen the division of the Democrats as their theme, and you'll see that. And they both sort of like apologize they apologize for not really covering the fact that, like, Manafort, the Trump campaign manager, was sentenced to prison this week, which is fairly unprecedented. But they're going to focus on the Democrats, just like, I mean, at least they cover some of the other stuff, but you'll see NBC News' Meet the Press is mostly on the divided Democrats in the 4-minute, 15-second news summary that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Good Sunday morning. Never mind that President Trump's campaign chairman is going to prison, and that Mr. Trump and Michael Cohen argued this week over which one of them is lying about a possible pardon. Our colleague Dana Milbank at the Washington Post pointed out that with President Trump's recent struggles on North Korea, on the trade deficit, on the border wall, there's only one thing that can save him: the Democrats. And as he said, right on cue, here they come. Democrats have spent much of the last month wrestling themselves to the ground. They were embarrassed over the revelation that Virginia Governor Ralph Northam had once dressed in blackface, startled by subsequent accusations of sexual assault against Northam's Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and chronically unsure this week over how to handle a comment by freshman Democrat Ilhan Omar, her second that many saw as anti-Semitic. An emerging, more progressive cohort of elected Democrats is coming into conflict with an older generation of centrists and traditional liberals. These two Democratic factions are united and divided. They're united about the urgency of defeating President Trump next year. But at the same time, they are divided, with each side seeing the other as the reason Mr. Trump may wind up winning after all.
You apologize for your last remarks. How are these different?
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar drew criticism after tweeting that U.S. politicians support Israel because it's all about the Benjamins, baby. She apologized, but then made this comment last week.
Talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country.
Jews have dual loyalty and can't be patriotic members of the country in which they live? Words matter.
Some progressives defended Omar, pointing to anti-Muslim slurs against her, like this flyer in West Virginia.
We think that hate and racism in our country is growing, no matter if you're Jewish, LGBTQ, Latino, immigrant, Muslim.
Late this week, House Democrats united around a broad resolution condemning hate after some progressives objected to an initial draft that only rebuked anti-Semitism. The episode is among those dividing 2020 Democrats.
I think it was right in this case to demonstrate that the House of Representatives wasn't going to tolerate hateful statements like the one that was made.
But several top presidential candidates, while condemning anti-Semitism, said Omar was unfairly targeted. The debate is exposing ideological, generational, and racial divides in the Democratic Party, as the progressive left is showing its strength.
It is time to break up America's tech giants.
Some 2020 Democrats are reluctant to embrace capitalism.
You know, again, the labels, I'm not sure any of them fit.
Championing the Green New Deal.
Does the Green New Deal go too far?
No. You cannot go too far on the issue of climate change.
And calling for Medicare for all.
Do you think eliminating private insurance would be a socialist idea?
No. Okay, so I strongly believe that we need to have Medicare for all.
Can a more centrist candidate break through in a party that is shifting to the left?
Why should we elect a candidate who says, no, that's not possible to do everything progressives want? Because I'm being honest.
This week, both former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg and Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown said no thanks to a presidential run, with former Vice President Joe Biden poised to jump into the race.
I have not made the final decision, but don't be surprised.
What is it? Even before his run is official, Biden is already explaining a decades-long record, including his role in passing the now controversial 1994 crime bill, his vote for the Iraq War, skepticism of Anita Hill, and past comments on busing to desegregate schools.
You know, I've been in this fight for a long time. I haven't always been right. I know we haven't always gotten things right, but I've always tried.
And joining me now from Cleveland is Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who announced this week, to the surprise of many, that
I will not have a clip of Sherrod Brown because I don't really think it's all that newsworthy when someone decides not to run for president. I mean, I guess it's a little newsworthy. I mean, he is a U.S. Senator, but I didn't think he said anything all that notable in that interview. Like I said, I will have an extended Liz Cheney clip where, like, all of a sudden Liz Cheney is the defender of the Jews. It's almost like the Meghan McCain thing, although she didn't cry. But I don't know how many Jewish constituents Liz Cheney has in Wyoming, but I find it difficult to believe that it's more than political opportunism, which I will discuss more when I get to that clip. But like I said, the Chuck Todd and Jake Tapper both seem to have focused on this Democratic divide, and I think it might be because of the South by Southwest thing, which is where Jake Tapper is doing his program from, State of the Union this morning. That's why the State of the Union is deep in the heart of Texas. I actually lived in Texas for a couple of years when I was growing up, so I remember that, how you're supposed to like clap during the Deep in the Heart of Texas song. That was something that's like kindergarten, first grade for me, so that's deeply embedded in me, even though I'm in no way a Texan. But that's the State of the Union, deep in the heart of Texas, and Democrats divided is again the theme. And you know, I said that I thought the NBC Meet the Press news summary was the best because it's long and substantive and has all this information, but you'll see Jake Tapper here covers pretty much all the same information in like 25% of the time, and I don't know, is that better? I guess do you like novels or do you like poetry, or I don't know, that's not exactly it, but you can let me know what you think after we watch this 1 minute 5 second news summary from CNN State of the Union, beginning of the show with Jake Tapper this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Austin, Texas, where the State of our Union is deep in the heart. We are live at the South by Southwest Festival, where tonight we will be moderating town halls with 3 Democratic presidential candidates. Now, much of the Democratic field is here, as is almost part of the field Texas native Beto O'Rourke, who dodged questions about his possible run yesterday. One potential candidate not here, Vice President Joe Biden, who still has yet to pull the trigger on a run. A brand new CNN Des Moines Register poll of Iowa Democratic voters shows Biden leading the pack right now, with Senator Bernie Sanders close behind, both men with substantial leads over the most diverse Democratic field ever to run. And this key early moment in the race comes as the Democratic Party, in the House at least, is showing some divisions prompted by freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's latest comments about supporters of Israel, and a resolution forced by the Omar controversy condemning hate in the House. that resolution and those comments giving President Trump exactly what he wants, dissension in the Democratic ranks. With me now to discuss this and much, much more is Democratic presidential candidate from right here in Texas.
And I will have a Julián Castro clip a little bit later. Like I said, I was reading the live comments along the way, and I saw that I actually got my first Super Chat contribution with a question. Thank you, David Tarr, for that contribution and question. It's always a bad idea, I think, for someone to commit to one term when they're running because, I mean, this is pretty much conventional wisdom, but it turns you into an automatic lame duck. I suppose if you have like a really close relationship with a really awesome vice president, maybe. There's been some rumors that maybe Biden was having secret talks with Beto, where like Biden and Beto were going to run as president, vice president, and Biden was going to say one term, and then Beto was going to be the awesome like president in waiting. Then you actually you're not a lame duck. You're actually running for 3 terms, right? Or I don't know. Does that solve the problem? And do we really need like 2 white guys both on the ticket together? That's Democratic identity politics. That question's always going to come up. But anyway, thanks for that question there, David Tarr, and the Super Chat contribution. My Super Chat contributions actually have surpassed my ad revenue for almost every month for years now, since the adpocalypse and then the institution of Super Chat. So thank you for that. That gives me more support than the ads that most of the time run on my videos when they don't get demonetized for ridiculous reasons. I did not put the word anti-Semitism anywhere in the video description or in the search tags because I figured that would be like an easy way to get demonetized, even though I'm talking a lot about anti-Semitism, so that's kind of bogus. But those last 2 news summaries, like I said, were about Democrat division, and the same information is pretty much covered in the ABC and Fox News summaries I'm about to show you, though, as I mentioned, Fox News never says the name Paul Manafort, I think, anywhere in Fox News Sunday this morning, and certainly not in the news summary I'm going to show you. But these 2 news summaries show you a different kind of bias. News programs, I've talked about this the last couple weeks, I think, where news programs have a bias towards the news that's related to whoever their exclusive guest is. So on ABC, their exclusive guest is the National Security Advisor John Bolton, and so the news story they give like extra focus to is what's happening in North Korea, foreign policy. And then over on Fox News Sunday, their exclusive guest is White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow, so they cover the same information you saw in the last 2 news summaries, but then they talk about the economy, the jobs report, the trade with China, and the possibility of recession. Some of it's not even good for Trump, which is surprising for Fox News. And Fox News Sunday is one of their supposed straight news programs, and they spend a lot of time complaining about the Democrats not giving them a primary debate, and because Chris Wallace and Brett Baer and Martha McCallum are all such straight news anchors, and it's not completely true. And I think the lack of mention of the name Paul Manafort will prove my point. But before I get to the Fox News summary, I want to show the ABC one, which, like I said, focuses extra on North Korea because they have both National Security Advisor John Bolton and his mustache as exclusive guests on the show. Although it wasn't really exclusive, as I'll explain, or completely exclusive, as I'll explain after we watch that 4.5-minute clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. So much to get to this morning, from the latest on the investigations into President Trump to questions surrounding Paul Manafort's sentencing and that Democratic infighting. We will cover it all. But we begin with those new and alarming developments coming out of North Korea. New satellite images suggest North Korea could be preparing to revive its missile testing just over a week after that Hanoi summit failed to produce a deal. These images, taken days before the summit but just released publicly on Friday, show vehicles, cranes, and rail cars near a facility outside Pyongyang where North Korea has previously assembled some of its intercontinental ballistic missiles, leading some experts to believe North Korea is preparing to launch what would be its first missile or rocket in over a year. Those images come just days after another satellite image emerged showing cranes and supplies appearing to be used to rebuild another launch site in North Korea. Despite these warning signs, on Friday, President Trump appeared confident in his relationship with Kim Jong-un.
Time will tell, but I have a feeling that our relationship with North Korea, Kim Jong-un and myself, Chairman Kim, I think it's a very good one. I think it remains good. I would be surprised in a negative way if he did anything that was not per our understanding.
So what to make of North Korea's latest moves, and was anything gained in those face-to-face meetings with Kim Jong-un? For more, let's bring in our headliner, the president's national security advisor, John Bolton. Last fall, Ilhan Omar became one of the first 2 Muslim women ever elected to Congress, one of the new faces of the Democratic House majority. But with that spotlight has come intense scrutiny, as comments by Omar about Israel in recent weeks have been perceived as anti-Semitic, sparking a debate dividing the Democratic Party over what constitutes anti-Semitism and what is legitimate political speech.
Congresswoman, Speaker Pelosi says it's up to you if you want to explain your comments at all.
It started with a February tweet in response to a story about the House Republican leader threatening action over Omar's criticism of Israel. It's all about the Benjamins, baby, she declared. She soon apologized for using age-old stereotypes of Jews using money to buy influence. But then more controversy after Omar questioned the loyalties of American Jews who support pro-Israel lobbying groups.
I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country.
Her fellow Democrats reacting harshly, including freshman Congresswoman Elaine Luria, who is Jewish and a Navy veteran.
When I entered the United States Naval Academy, I first took the oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Is that not enough to prove my loyalty to our nation?
Democratic Minnesota State Senator Ron Latz told NPR he talked to Omar about how she should discuss Israel even before she was elected.
Unfortunately, she keeps repeating the mistakes. So I'm troubled by what appears to be a pattern reflecting an attitude, at least toward Israel, if not toward Jews.
But Omar's defenders say she is facing unfair scrutiny.
I just want to make sure that we are protecting also the right for the first Muslim woman to be in Congress and to question legitimately foreign policy towards Israel.
Omar herself has been the target of intolerance. Just last week, this poster in the West Virginia Capitol at a GOP day connected Omar to the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
The motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The debate over Omar's words sparking a House resolution this week, but broadened to condemn not just anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobia and white supremacy. That resolution passed the House unanimously among Democrats with just 23 no votes from Republicans who said Omar should have been directly named in the resolution. Let's bring in the roundtable.
And I have no clips from the roundtable, but I did mention before I showed the clip that I was going to explain why the interview with John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, wasn't completely exclusive, because I happened to be flipping through the channels this morning and I saw the Maria Bartiromo show on Fox News. Was it called, like, Sunday Futures, something? I can't remember the name of her show, but she also had John Bolton on, so it wasn't completely an exclusive interview, but I think it did sort of bias their coverage towards North Korea, though. I mean, the North Korea story is important, although the development that North Korea isn't being honest and might be, like, building nuclear weapons or preparing to launch missiles again. I guess was the gist of that story there. That's not really newsworthy because we know they have that capability, and I guess it would be newsworthy if they actually start a missile, get a missile ready for launch and launch it. That anyway, it's not newsworthy, but you have to agree, I think, that coverage was biased towards North Korea by the fact that they had this supposed exclusive interview with John Bolton, and as I said, John Bolton's mustache. But I want to get to the Fox News Sunday news summary, which also was pretty good, despite, like I said, the lack of mention of Paul Manafort earlier. And the one other thing, though, is it does have that bias towards economic. I mean, it's not like the economic news that they present here isn't news, but their extra focus on it, is it, I don't know. It just seems to me that it's a little bit biased towards the Larry Kudlow exclusive interview on Fox News Sunday this morning, which I will talk with you, and I'll talk with you a little more about the news summary, and then the 4 newsmaker clip, or the final news summary, and the 3 newsmaker clips coming up afterwards, after we watch the Fox News summary from Chris Wallace as an introduction, then hands it over to Mike Emanuel, congressional correspondent, to talk about the anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party over here.
Hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Trump is set to unveil his 2020 budget tomorrow amid a growing federal deficit and an economy that may be showing signs of slowing down. In a moment, we'll talk with White House Chief Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow about that and prospects for a trade deal with China. But first, the other fights on Capitol Hill. The controversy over whether Michael Cohen has lied to Congress again. And Democrats still divided after passing a resolution responding to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's comments on Israel. Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel.
The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Democrats expanded the measure to condemn anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, and other forms of bigotry, and only indirectly references Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
This resolution ended up really being an effort to protect her and was completely watered down.
The controversy taking attention away from Democrats' passing of a massive election reform bill.
Let us look to the Senate and say, when we pass this bill, it's not just what happens on this floor. It's the message it sends to the American people.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that bill is dead on arrival. Meanwhile, House Republicans are questioning Democratic staff spending hours with Michael Cohen prior to his testimony last week. Some Republicans charge it was an effort to coach a witness, while Democrats say it was normal preparation. And there are more questions about whether Cohen, who is slated to begin a 3-year prison sentence in May for crimes including lying to Congress, lied again.
I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
It's a stone-cold lie, and he's lied about a lot of things, but when he lied about the pardon, that was really a lie.
And in a pair of weak economic reports, the U.S. trade deficit in goods reached its highest level last year as the U.S. imported a record number of products, including from China, undermining the president's promise to cut that imbalance and bring back jobs. In February, the U.S. added just 20,000 new jobs, the fewest in nearly a year and a half. Chris?
Mike, thank you. Joining us now, President Trump's top White House economic advisor, Larry Kudlow.
If you go back and listen to like the last 5-6 seconds there, I think you can hear someone laughing in the background. I think it might be Larry Kudlow laughing at the way Fox News is downplaying the economy, like the bad news he has to answer for. I don't know. You can. Was it a laugh? Is it a cough? There's something about like 6 seconds before the end of that clip, if you listen carefully. But what you won't hear anywhere in that clip is the mention of Paul Manafort. Otherwise, I thought the Mike Emanuel story was not that bad. I mean, there were other biases in there. Of course, they focused on this idea that the Democrats prepping Michael Cohen before his testimony was witness tampering. And of course, that's something trial attorneys do all the time, prosecutors do all the time. Adam Schiff is, of course, a former prosecutor, so of course he spent time prepping his witness before he testified. And do prosecutors tamper with witnesses when they prep their witnesses? Every day, as a former criminal defense attorney, public defender, the answer to that question is kinda. I mean, they shape their testimony and in ways that I think is sometimes unethical. And I don't know, did that happen in this case? Well, Fox News really focuses on that. I mean, from what I understand, the real norm breaking here is that the Democrats didn't invite the Republicans to participate in those sessions. It's not so much that there aren't regularly sessions where witnesses who are going to testify before the committee publicly have private sessions with members of the committee and their staff to talk about what they're going to say, to sort of like organize the whole, to prep the questions and all sorts of stuff like that. So that is my take on the Fox News Sunday news summary. And there's one more brief news summary. This is about 35 seconds from Margaret Brennan at the very beginning of CBS's Face the Nation. It's also sort of a South by Southwest influenced news summary, but and that last news summary, because of Larry Kudlow, I think it was very biased towards the economic news, although it wasn't so much biased towards Trump on the economic news. That's why I think you heard that rueful laugh from Larry Kudlow at the end of the clip. But this Margaret Brennan clip is focused on the Democrats, maybe because of South by Southwest and because they have this interview with Elizabeth Warren. But instead of taking the Democrats divided topic that I used in my title, it's just Democrats getting ready for 2020 and the field is getting crowded. And that's the 35 seconds I'll discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin this morning with the already packed field of potential candidates for 2020. And there are signs that former Vice President Joe Biden is planning to enter the race next month. A new poll out this morning shows him leading in Iowa, with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders close behind. A handful of those candidates appeared over the weekend at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe caught up with one of the big names in the race, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
And I'm going to show about a 4-minute Elizabeth Warren clip in the clip after next. I also noticed that I got a Super Chat contribution along the way from Lulu Girl asking what combination of capitalism and socialism do you think is best for the U.S. And in the clip after next, the Elizabeth Warren clip, the whole capitalism socialism issue comes up, and I plan on talking about that for a minute or two after I show that clip. So stay tuned for that, Lulu Girl, and anyone else interested in my thoughts on capitalism and socialism. But before I show that, I do have a clip I want to show from NBC's Meet the Press. I have kind of talked about before. This is the Liz Cheney clip. It's even longer. It's like 4 minutes, 23 seconds. And this is Liz Cheney trying to focus all the anti-Semitism energy on the Democratic Party. And Chuck Todd, I mean, I think he kind of buys the Republican argument for not voting for the Democratic resolution against all forms of hate. 23 Republicans didn't vote for it, and you saw in that a couple of those news summaries, they sort of justified that because they didn't focus on Ilhan Omar, and I think Chuck Todd is a little bit biased towards accepting the rationale of those 23 Republicans in his interview here with Liz Cheney, but he does at least bring up some of the Republican hypocrisy on this, and I will discuss all of that a little more with you after we watch this 4-minute, 23-second back and forth between Chuck Todd and Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the I don't know, daughter of Darth Vader. Does that mean she's Princess Leia? I don't think so. Over in this clip.
With what happened in the House this week. Because it was a bit of a surprise. You voted against this broad resolution, and while your criticism of the resolution I totally understand, but you were in the minority in your party. Did your fellow House Republicans make a mistake by voting with the Democrats on this resolution?
No, look, I think that there were two ways we could have gone. Some of the people in our conference clearly looked at it and said there's nothing objectionable in the resolution. My statement made clear that was my view as well. But I decided to vote against it because I think it was really clearly an effort to actually protect Ilhan Omar, to cover up her bigotry and anti-Semitism by refusing to name her. The Democrats have yet to take any action to remove her from her committee. And they've got a real problem. I mean, the extent to which they are now abiding by anti-Semitism, enabling anti-Semitism in their party is something we watch them struggle with, but something that's very dangerous for the country. So I'm hopeful that they will be able to stand up and do the right thing on this.
I am curious. There was a bit of criticism. Politico noted their Republican sources were quite peeved at Cheney, referring to you, to say the least. The thinking among most top Republicans is this: when you're part of a leadership team, you stick together, period. Criticism being, since you're a member of leadership, that you should have spoken with one voice.
Well, look, I think that, you know how the Hill works. There are always those anonymous sources who are out there sniping. But I think the important thing for us to be focused on and to remember, the Democrats have been in charge now for about 2.5 months in the House. And in that time, they've become the party of anti-Semitism, the party of infanticide, the party of socialism. They've passed legislation that's violated the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. It's really time for the Democrats, the leadership in that party, to stop it, to stand up and to act worthy, frankly, of the trust the American people have placed in them. It's crucial for the nation.
I want to unpack a couple things you just said there. First, on the issue of, you said you think Congresswoman Omar should lose her committee assignments. You led the fight to get Congressman Steve King, Republican, to have him stripped of his committee assignment. Let me ask you this. Why should congressional leaders do that? If the voters are going to send these folks, the voters in Western Iowa know Steve King, for better or for worse. And the voters in Minnesota knew her comments were very much well publicized. If they send them there, should congressional leaders really be stripping, not allowing them on committees?
Yeah, I think that the point is voters send them there. Nobody is saying we're going to expel them. We respect the decision the voters have made. But there are certain things that shouldn't be part of our public discourse. White supremacy is one of those. And anti-Semitism, the history in terms of what happens when you don't stand up to the evil, the history in terms of how quickly words turn into something much more horrible when it comes to anti-Semitism. As a nation, we must at all times stand up to it. And the kind of anti-Semitism that you're seeing now from Ilhan Omar and that has been supported by her colleagues is a kind of anti-Semitism that really has the ability to creep in and become normalized in our discourse, and we have an absolute obligation not to let that happen.
Well, there's actually an anti-Semitism that has creeped into our discourse. Look at George Soros, okay? The Republican and conservative attacks on George Soros over the years. In fact, Kevin McCarthy had to pull one tweet that implied that he was essentially trying to buy this or buy that. That's gotten mainstreamed in ways for years, to the point where George Soros had some guy was trying to pipe bomb him. This whataboutism. Can I just tell you, Congresswoman, this whataboutism where everybody is, that everybody tries to point to the other side.
Chuck,
and it's getting
the whataboutism absolutely should not go on. And everyone, including Leader McCarthy, has stood up absolutely firmly to condemn anti-Semitism. The thing that people need to be focused on here, though, is that the Democrats in the House of Representatives and even some of the Democrats themselves are completely frustrated with the fact that the leadership is, they are protecting her. This isn't just being silent. They are protecting her by failing to put a resolution on the floor that names her and that strips her of her committee assignment. Instead, they put a resolution on the floor which she then went out and said, this is a tremendous victory for me. Now, if we are not going to be in a position where you say the kind of language that she has said again and again and again is absolutely unacceptable and has no place in our discourse, then those people who won't condemn it are enabling it.
There was some concern by singling her out. You only make her a target, and they pointed to that way.
Well, I actually don't think it's a bad thing that the Democrats came up with a solution that Democrats could vote for unanimously, where Ilhan Omar could say that it's a victory because they condemned Islamophobia, which is something I think is condemnable, and I argued for many years and got a lot of negative feedback from some of my viewers on that. You remember Bill Maher and Ben Affleck had that long argument about Islamophobia, and Bill Maher was claiming Islamophobia didn't even exist, and how it's just being afraid of Muslims. That's not a real negative thing. And now, of course, after the whole Muslim ban thing, nobody tries to argue that anymore. And so before I have a few things I want to talk about about anti-Semitism before, and that was the last clip on the whole Ilhan Omar controversy. Then I have two more Democrats talking, two more potential Democratic presidential candidates, Elizabeth Warren and Julián Castro, are the next two clips, but they're not talking about anti-Semitism. But I think that it was a good thing, like I said, that they didn't focus on this woman of color, this Muslim woman of color in Congress, even though I think some of the things she said do play on anti-Semitic tropes. But what really bothered me about Liz Cheney there, well, there were several things that she said that bothered me. But she's saying, we can't tolerate anti-Semitism, but it's really only Ilhan Omar's. It's not like anyone condemned Kevin McCarthy, the current Republican majority leader, for his George Soros thing. But on the subject of the George Soros trope, that's what George Soros is attacking our democracy or whatever. That actually happened right here where I live. The Republican, well, she left the Republican Party, but the prosecutor, the district attorney where I live, set up a website that I think is not available anymore. It's called Sacramento Under Attack. She claimed George Soros was funding the guy who was running against her in the June 2018 primary that she won by like 65%. I've never thought she was a good prosecutor, and that she also just decided not to prosecute these police officers who shot Stephan Clark almost exactly a year ago, March 18th, 2018. I talked about that a little last week when I showed this Face the Nation photo of protesters here in Sacramento. And that actually, the day after I did my show last week, there were these protests in the wealthy area of Sacramento where the police came out in like riot gear, and when the crowds were dispersing, they did what's called kettling. They forced them to go onto this bridge, and then they arrested over 80 people. They arrested clergy. They arrested peaceful protesters. I was so disturbed by what happened here in Sacramento this last week that I actually wrote up a statement. A lot of times I talk about the ACLU, and I remind everyone I don't speak for the ACLU. I am just, everything I talk about here is my own opinion, even though I'm an activist with the ACLU, and I serve on the board of the ACLU of Northern California, and I chair the Sacramento chapter. Well, I actually got to say something that was official ACLU statement. This is because of what happened. Before this, if you have your ACLU Constitution like I do, look at your First Amendment, and you'll find out that the police here in Sacramento last Monday, they violated every single part of the First Amendment. That's what you can see in my statement here. Last night, local Sacramento police attacked every single First Amendment protected right and freedom. 3 different police agencies conspired to arrest a pastor engaged in peaceful protest, attacking the freedom of religion. Many more people engaging in peaceful protest were arrested, attacking the First Amendment freedom of speech. Journalists reporting on the protest were arrested, attacking the First Amendment freedom of the press. Arresting peaceful protesters also attacks the First Amendment rights of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. That was actually a quick statement I wrote up because I was looking at my Constitution here, and I was looking at the First Amendment. If you happen to have one of these ACLU Constitutions, the First Amendment is on page 25, and you go through, and the police here in Sacramento, they violated every single clause. So anyway, that was last week. I talked about how I might get a little work done on my Turn the Supreme Court Up to 11 edited, produced video, but it's been a really busy week. That's not even the only thing, and I've just played a minor supporting role in all the protests here. I don't want to center myself when there are all sorts of real, like, all the way in activists. Sometimes I think I'm more of a dilettante activist in some ways, even though I did go to one protest and I'm hoping to go to a couple more. But anyway, I want to talk about that a little more after I talked about the anti-Semitism that and the George Soros thing. But a couple of the other things that bothered me about what Liz Cheney said there is first, and Chuck Todd's questioning of her is, first he said, I understand your vote is understandable for not focusing on Ilhan Omar. That's what I thought Chuck Todd, one of his weaknesses. He also talked about Steve King and just said, shouldn't, since they were elected, Steve King and Ilhan Omar, shouldn't you just let them, be regular members of Congress? And the thing about Steve King is he's been a crazy white supremacist for like 10 years. And it's just like in the last couple months that the Republicans finally acted on his comments about saying, white supremacy is misunderstood. So I thought Chuck Todd was not strong enough on that false analogy. And then, of course, he let Liz Cheney get away with saying the Democratic Party is all about socialism and infanticide and anti-Semitism. I've talked about the anti-Semitism. I talked about the whole infanticide thing a few weeks back with the Ralph Northam comments really being about fetuses that are not viable but are born, how you talk to the parents about that, and I don't want to go down that road again. But on the socialism part of it, I do want to get to this next clip that I've promised. This is the 4-minute Elizabeth Warren clip talking to Ed O'Keefe. This is from CBS's Face the Nation, both talking about the history of antitrust laws and how it might apply to the big tech giants here, mostly, in Silicon Valley here where I live in California. Well, I don't live in Silicon Valley, but I live in California, and I'm familiar with the Silicon Valley industries somewhat, and apparently Elizabeth Warren wants to break them up, and she explains how that's part of capitalism, and she talks about being a capitalist, but I'll talk about what kind of capitalist I am and what I think socialism is, and democratic socialism and mixed capitalism and all of that after we watch Elizabeth Warren for 4 minutes 3 seconds on CBS's Face the Nation over in this clip.
Correspondent Ed O'Keefe caught up with one of the big names in the race, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, and asked about her new proposal to break up tech companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook.
The giant tech companies right now are eating up little tiny businesses, startups, and competing unfairly. Look at it this way. Someone like Amazon runs a platform, the place where you buy your coffee maker and get it delivered in 48 hours, and that's great. But in addition to that, they're sucking up all that information about every purchase, every sale, and every one of the other little businesses that are offering their products on Amazon. And when Amazon sees one that's profitable, they say, think we'll go into business against them now that they've got all this extra information. And they put their own business out there to compete on selling coffee makers, put themselves on page 1, put the competitor back on page 6, and the competitor's business is just gone. So what I'm saying is we got to break these guys apart. You want to run a platform? That's fine. You don't get to run a whole bunch of the businesses as well. You want to run a business? That's fine. You don't get to run the platform. Think of it this way. It's like in baseball. You can be the umpire, or you can own one of the teams, but you don't get to be the umpire and own the teams.
And let me just get this clear. If you had your way, Facebook would have to sell off Instagram. Amazon would have to sell off Whole Foods.
All those little businesses that they're running, competing businesses. Yep.
Who is the federal government to tell these companies they have to do that?
There's antitrust law that's been around for more than 100 years. And the federal government has done this many times. For example, broke up Standard Oil, broke up the great monopolies of the late 19th century and early 20th century. And the reason for that is so that we can keep a competitive economy.
This idea has gotten a lot of criticism.
From
Howard Schultz, the guy who's thinking about running as an independent.
Billionaire,
yes,
right?
And he suggested that your proposal is, quote, inconsistent with our free enterprise system, and said that it's emblematic of Democrats proposing, his word, fantasy ideas that will never be implemented. And that instead, perhaps you could just find ways to discuss with these companies ways to make it more competitive.
You mean we could ask these multi-billion-dollar companies nicely if they would not eat up the competition and just behave better in the marketplace? Really? We've had laws around against antitrust activity and predatory pricing for over 100 years because we understand that the way markets work are when there's real competition in that market.
And you know that this kind of proposal feeds into the arguments that Republicans have been making to label Democrats as anti-capitalist, adopting these socialist ideas.
The reality is, it is not capitalism to have one giant that comes in and dominates, a monopolist that dominates a market. What I have supported all the way through are the kinds of things that help level the playing field. So I think a level playing field says that the big guys have to pay kind of like everybody else does, and they have to pay to help create some opportunities for them.
But you know you're getting labeled, and you're getting coupled in with a few of your other Democratic contenders as someone who supports socialist ideas. Do we describe you as a capitalist? What's the best way to describe you?
I believe in markets. Markets that work, markets that have a cop on the beat and have real rules and everybody follows them. I believe in a level playing field.
So if you get labeled as a socialist...
Well, it's just wrong.
So there you saw Elizabeth Warren at the end saying she is a capitalist, not a socialist, although she believes in regulated markets with a cop on the beat. And that's part of the definition of what I believe in. Remember, I mentioned earlier seeing... Where did I put it here? Oh, this super chat contribution from Lulu Girl. And I've actually made a couple videos about this over the years. I think Michael Moore's Mistake in Capitalism, A Love Story on FDR's Second Bill of Rights is the title of a video that I made a while back. Also, my video about Ayn Rand, Stephen Colbert and Ayn Rand, and that was a long time ago, and I think I talk about how I believe in what I like to call mixed capitalism, which is capitalism not only with the cop on the beat, like Elizabeth Warren was saying, which, you know, to make sure that monopolies don't form, and anti-competitive and anti-consumer. You know, that's something else Elizabeth Warren is famous for, is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, to make sure that consumers aren't hurt by these big financial institutions. So I believe in that part, but also I believe in this, what's called a social safety net, social welfare. I might even be persuaded into believing in some sort of minimum income or housing, or just like a subsistence level to make sure that nobody is who wants help isn't living, in squalor. Everyone has an because one of the things Republicans and people on the right wing, like the strict capitalists, like to say is that if you give people too many handouts, they won't have a desire to work. Well, I mean, I think if you keep people at a subsistence level, make sure that nobody is going hungry, nobody who is is unhoused, who doesn't want to be unhoused, that everybody has access. If you keep people at just that level, I think people still have a motivation to, do better than a subsistence level to, create, some level of comfort for themselves and their family. That's still something that motivates people. So I believe in what I think of as mixed capitalism, which is both the cop on the beat and then the strong social safety net. And I think that's not that different from what other people call democratic socialism, because as I've talked about in previous videos, I have a couple of videos from the last presidential election cycle when Bernie Sanders first talked about democratic socialism, whether it actually is socialism. And as someone with a undergraduate degree in history who just studied very closely the evolution of political philosophy, and it's something I know something about. I would say socialism is government or collective ownership of the means of production. And, something like Medicare for all, that is not socialism. It could be socialism if the government owns all the hospitals and employs all the doctors. But if the government just pays all the bills and private companies employ doctors, that is not socialism. Socialism, Amtrak, where government owns the tracks and the trains, that's kind of socialism. But Social Security, where there's like old age pensions, that's not socialism. That's not government ownership of the means of production. Almost nothing that Bernie Sanders is advocating, free college, unless government owns all the college, and government does own some colleges, but and employs some professors. But anyway, I hope that answers the question. I guess I went off on it for a while So I believe in mixed capitalism, which is kind of like democratic socialism, because democratic socialism isn't really socialism because it's not government ownership of the means of production. It's really just mixed capitalism, which is capitalism which maximizes profit, which is great if profit is the most important thing, which it isn't. You have to also make sure that people aren't living in squalor and poverty, aren't in great pain, that you want to make sure that doesn't happen as much as you can. The losers in capitalism aren't suffering. And anyway, that's my pretty long, extensive answer to that question. I hope that answers that question. I want to move on to two more newsmaker, one more presidential candidate, and then the Adam Schiff Trump collusion update. The last clip here from presidential candidates is a long shot candidate, Julián Castro, talking about reparations. And I don't know, this is kind of a sort of backhanded attack on Bernie Sanders, since you'll see there's a Bernie Sanders clip in here. And Bernie Sanders has had some problems having a connection to the African American members of the Democratic Party, and I think in some ways Julián Castro is trying to exploit that for reasons I will discuss a little more after I show you that 2.5-minute clip, which we can watch together. This is from CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper asking Julián Castro about reparations over here.
Let's turn to another issue on those lines, but this is also dividing Democrats on the trail. You've said that there needs to be some kind of reparations to descendants of slaves to compensate for years of slavery and discrimination against African Americans in this country. Take a listen to Bernie Sanders, one of your campaign rivals, at a CNN town hall when it was pointed out that you and Elizabeth Warren support some form of reparations.
What do they mean? I'm not sure that anyone's very clear. What I've just said is that I think we must do everything that we can to address the massive level of disparity that exists in this country.
So What do you mean? Do you think that there should be actual monetary payments to descendants of slaves? Do you support more like what Senator Sanders is talking about, policies such as child care and education that help those who are disadvantaged?
Well, you know, what I said was that that I've long believed that this country should address slavery, the original sin of slavery, including by looking at reparations. And if I'm president, then I'm going to appoint a commission or task force to determine the best way to do that. There's a tremendous amount of disagreement on how we would do that. But let me just say something about Senator Sanders' response there, because he was also asked this question in 2016. Mm-hmm. What he said on The View, I think, the other day was that he didn't think the best way to address this was for the United States to write a check. To my mind, that may or may not be the best way to address it. However, it's interesting to me that when it comes to Medicare for all, health care, you know, the response there has been, we need to write a big check. That when it comes to tuition-free or debt-free college, the answer has been, we need to write a big check. And so if the issue is compensating the descendants of slaves, I don't think that the argument about writing a big check ought to be the argument that you make if you're making an argument that a big check needs to be written for a whole bunch of other stuff.
Interesting.
So if under the Constitution we compensate people because we take their property, why wouldn't you compensate people who actually were property?
Interesting. Very quickly, let's turn to the southern border. The border.
That was actually a great line at the end there from Julián Castro. You know, if you compensate people, and you can find that in your Fifth Amendment over here, the takings clause. If you compensate people for taking their property, why wouldn't you compensate people who are property? I've seen them like playing up the reparations argument over on Fox News a lot in the last couple weeks. Sandy's lying right there, and Dash just walked right by. I don't know what's going on here. I do have a Dash and Sandy clip at the end, but if you want to know more about why reparations aren't such a crazy idea, I suggest Googling Ta-Nehisi Coates reparations. He wrote a great article in the Atlantic, and it's in this book here. We Were 8 Years in Power from Ta-Nehisi Coates right here. But it's actually available free online. Just reparations, Ta-Nehisi Coates, if you can figure out how to spell Ta-Nehisi. Good luck to you on that. And I have one more clip for you. My cat Dash is over there by the window, and Sandy is sleeping over there by the door. I will have the Dash and Sandy clip at the end, but this is the Adam Schiff Trump collusion update, talking both about the Manafort sentencing and the Cohen pardon controversy. You know, is Michael Cohen lying? Is Donald Trump lying? That all comes up in the 4-minute, 25-second final news clip that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Welcome back. This was a week in which we saw President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, get sentenced to prison. Think about that for a moment. The man who made sure Donald Trump secured the nomination at the Republican convention was sentenced to 47 months in prison, with sentencing in another case coming this week. We also saw Mr. Trump and Michael Cohen each call the other a liar over whether Cohen sought a pardon from the president. There's a lot to chew on. We're going to turn to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, who joins me now from Los Angeles. And on Spring Forward Day, I'm very grateful for you getting up that extra hour early. Congressman Schiff, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Thank you.
Let me just start with the basic question here. Who's lying, the president or Michael Cohen, when it comes to whether Michael Cohen asked for a pardon? And more importantly, did Michael Cohen lie to Congress again?
Well, the central question of our investigation is, why did Michael Cohen lie before our committee about Moscow Trump Tower? Why would this be in his interest? Was this something that he did alone, or were there others involved in it? And there are reasons to believe that this was not a lone decision of Michael Cohen. What we are looking for is corroborative evidence. And the reason why this whole Moscow Trump Tower issue is so central to our investigation is that it explains, or potentially explains, the president's bizarre affinity for Vladimir Putin, and that is that he stood to make more money from this transaction than any deal in his life, and sought the Kremlin's help to make it happen while concealing this from the public. That still may be an animating principle for the president. He may believe that when he leaves office, that he still wants to build this tower. And while that may not be criminal, it is nonetheless corrupt and distorts our policy. So, that is certainly the central question for us. In terms of who's telling the truth between Michael Cohen and the president, we know that the president has made probably over 1,000 false statements about the Russia issues. And here we're going to simply have to find what corroboration we can to find out where the truth lies.
I was just going to say, is it safe to say you can't take Michael Cohen at his word on anything?
I don't think in terms of making the case to the public, and here we're not making the case to a jury about what took place, that we can rely solely on the testimony of Michael Cohen. We're going to need corroboration. To me, in looking at what Michael Cohen said in the open hearing and then what his lawyer said afterwards, it was very much like what Donald Trump did when he said that he had no knowledge of these payments to Stormy Daniels, and then Rudy Giuliani said, oh, yes, he did. Well, where is the truth there? We asked Michael Cohen about this extensively. Those transcripts will be made public. The public can evaluate his credibility themselves.
It looks like, we don't know this for sure, but it looks like Robert Mueller is going to complete his investigation without subpoenaing the president before the grand jury, or coming up with a way to have him interviewed before the grand jury. President Clinton went before Ken Starr's grand jury. And if indeed Mr. Mueller decides not to issue that subpoena or figure out how to get the president in front of that grand jury, is that going to have been a mistake, considering we have so many questions about whose testimony should you believe, Michael Cohen's or Donald Trump's?
Yes, I think it is a mistake, and I've said all along that I don't think Bob Mueller should rely on written answers. When you get written answers from a witness, it's really the lawyer's answers as much as the client's answer. And here you need to be able to ask follow-up questions in real time. But I think the constraint that Bob Mueller is operating under is he had an acting attorney general who was appointed because he would be hostile to a subpoena on the president. And now he has a permanent attorney general who was chosen for the same hostility to his investigation, who would likely oppose that step. I also think that the special counsel feels some time pressure to conclude his work. And knowing that the White House would drag out a fight over the subpoena, that may be an issue as well. But I do think ultimately it's a mistake because probably the best way to get the truth would be to put the president under oath, because as he's made plain in the past, he feels it's perfectly fine to lie to the public. After all, he has said, it's not like I'm talking before a magistrate. Well, maybe he should talk before a magistrate.
I want to move.
So that was the Adam Schiff Trump collusion update, and there was kind of an interesting part in there where he talked about how Trump made the whole Trump Tower deal that was going to make Trump so much money, made him lie to the American people, and maybe even when he gets out of office, he's hoping to make that Trump Tower deal, and that might be corrupt but not illegal, which is, I don't know, is that like prepping for a Mueller report that doesn't find illegality? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. That was the last of my news clips. I did promise a bonus Dash and Sandy clip before that. If you liked all the clips I picked out, I think I spent over 10 hours on this show today before the broadcast. Give me a thumbs up. Give me a supportive comment. I've also talked about Super Chat, and down in the video description there's also links to Patreon and to PayPal, where at the $5 support level on either of those last two support systems, you can get this sticker. At the $10 level, you get this ACLU Constitution I was talking about and this sticker. I appreciate all of that support. And for the Dash and Sandy fans out there, before I finish up, here is Dash and Sandy at my front door. You can see kind of a Chewy box in the background, which has a lot of dog and cat food they seem oblivious to, but I showed Dash trying to get out when Jim Jordan was talking last week. Maybe just Dash always wants to get out now, because Dash seems to want to get out the front door this morning in the 36-second clip I'll show you here. And that's it. You saw a mewing from Dash. You heard whining from Sandy, that I hear way too much all the time. Thanks for joining me. That's the end of the show. And I'll be back next week and for every week for the foreseeable future. Maybe in the middle of the week if I have some reason to make an edited, produced video and time to do it. Until then, I guess I will see all of you around the internet.